All right, so I'm talking here with Larry Kunz from North Carolina at the STC Summit. So Larry, what are you presenting on tomorrow?
Well, I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of a project manager about some trends that are affecting our profession. I teach a project management class to a certificate program, students at Duke University, and for years I told them that in my 30-year career, the basic process for technical documentation hasn't changed. And the last couple of years I realized that that's not true anymore. So there's been some very fundamental changes to the process brought on by things like collaborative authoring, user-generated content, agile programming, which we see a lot of in the software industry. And from a project manager's standpoint, it can be scary at first to see these things because we teach about carefully crafting a plan at the very beginning, and this is your doc plan, and it's absolutely sacred, and you go forward with it, and there's a long project life cycle. And all of those things go out the window with these new trends. And what I'll be talking about here at the summit is what a project manager can do about those, and how in fact they're not as scary as they might look, and how we can come up with some techniques.
So you mentioned what a project manager might do. So is your audience technical writers who are also project managers, or people who just need to interact with them more? How do you see that focus on project management fitting a tech writer audience?
Technical writers often do project management, sometimes on their own projects. So that, I think, primarily what you said, technical writers who are also project managers. But I think it would have a lot of value for technical writers who work with project managers who may be asked to do things differently than they did before. Hopefully this will give them some insight into why that's happening.
So you mentioned Agile as one of these catalysts that has changed the whole dynamic. How has that happened? What does Agile do that's different now?
Well, Agile, I like to think of it as just-in-time development. First of all, it's based on user stories and customer requirements, which ought to be very good news to technical communicators who have been talking about doing audience analysis for years. It's right up our alley, and we as technical communicators have a lot to contribute to the process. But secondly, if we're used to those long, and I mean long in terms of time, monolithic product life cycles, where we started with a doc plan and 9 months later we knocked out a set of manuals and online helps, let's say, that won't fly in Agile. Agile is based on much shorter, maybe month-long cycles, and at the end of any of those, the product developers can elect to ship the product to the customers if it's the right time and if it meets the customer requirements. And we as tech writers need to be able likewise to publish.
So from a project manager's perspective, how are they viewing a tech writer who's involved in this Agile process? Is there just more pressure on the tech writer to deliver, or is there more pressure on the project manager? Or
it's not so much pressure as a different orientation. The tech writer used to be responsible in the way old days for writing a certain book, let's say. You write the user's guide, and 9 months later, I expect you to have produced the user's guide. Today, we're going to ask the writers to develop topics. And I'm talking now structured authoring, maybe DITA, or some other topic-based approach where a group of writers may produce different pieces that are assembled together in ways that we can't predict right now. So a writer no longer feels that sense of ownership. This is my user's guide, but the writer needs to write topics that will be amassed with other writers' topics and have to look appropriate together. It's a different orientation.
So you're saying that this Agile method almost requires technical writers to adopt this little topic-based approach rather than crafting the whole documentation set themselves. It's more of a collaborative, it almost propels people toward a collaborative authoring model?
That's a good statement. And the other thing it does is the amount of content they're working with is probably more tightly confined. Agile has iterations or sprints where the product developers might work on one or two specific features rather than any whole product. And likewise, the writers are going to be writing about one or two specific features rather than about the entire product. And they need to get used to doing that a feature at a time, whereas in the past maybe they didn't work that way.
Well, what are some of the other things that have changed besides Agile that you might mention?
Well, we have user-generated content really coming into the fore, and it's so new that we're still learning the best practices. And I might interject here that one thing I hope my conference session will be is certainly not containing all the answers, but a catalyst for discussion and searching among the whole profession as to what the best practices are. User-generated content, again, if I'm a project manager and I had my documentation plan that was sacrosanct, that doesn't accommodate the idea of user-generated content. Users are writing blog articles or other feedback, usually from the web, that are really good information on how to use the product, and that other users consider to be at least as authoritative as the quote-unquote official stuff. My project plan has to be able to accommodate that and find a way to package it with all of the other content. And we get into content management here, content strategy.
So if you have writers who have adopted DITA in order to collaborate together on a project, and you have users who are generating content that's probably not in a DITA format, how do you mesh the two together?
Well, we need to find a way to make them harmonious. I've seen DITA Wiki, and I'm not sure that's the answer, but it's certainly a good attempt to...
What is DITA Wiki?
DITA Wiki is a wiki-based way of generating DITA content. And I'm afraid I don't know enough about it to describe it much better than that. But I think it's an honest effort to give the users a way to input content that's easy for them, that will encourage them to actually do it, and yet when it arrives at the content strategist's desk or the content manager's desk or wherever, it's not so completely out from left field. It's not totally incompatible in terms of format and style, that someone could actually integrate it with the rest of the information.
Was that just like ditawiki.org or com, or is it just a concept of a DITA Wiki?
It's a concept of a DITA Wiki. I think IBM's involved in prototypes. And again, we're getting into areas I don't know that much about, but if you Google DITA Wiki, you would find it.
So is there any other thing besides user-generated content, Agile methodology, that are new forces into this whole project management, tech writing, production?
There are others, but those are the two I'm planning to focus on. And very interestingly, they are very similar to each other in the effects that they have on our lives. They're not two separate talks that I'm combining into one, but they're a lot the same. And I think the best practices we can adopt in response to those are in many cases overlapping, if not identical.
So you're kind of approaching a lot of things from the project manager's perspective, and tech writers, we often don't see that perspective, or we don't see things from their perspective. What's the project manager's perspective of a technical writer in a project?
Well, the technical writer has to produce work. That's pretty much the way a project manager sees almost everything, is everyone has to produce something.
But are the tech writers kind of like last on the project manager's mind? I mean, the project manager usually focuses on the UI, and
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm thinking about the project manager who's specifically managing the documentation project. But I'm really glad you made that distinction. I was making an assumption, because there is often a big overall project manager.
Yeah.
And as the documentation project manager, I have to make sure that that person understands the importance of our role. And by the way, I think Agile and Web 2.0 help us make our case, especially because Agile, as I said, is based on user stories, which is very much like the audience analysis that we're comfortable doing.
Okay. So, Larry, tell me, what's your specialty when you're at work? You're a project manager of TechCom, is that right?
That's right. I do other things. I write some content. I do a little information architecture. In fact, I recently got some new business cards, and I had to stop and think, well, what am I going to put on there? And I ended up putting project manager.
So if you could give one piece of advice to people in that role who are managing big TechCom projects, what would it be, given all these new things, Agile and user-generated content? What's the one thing they should really focus on to be successful?
Well, embrace them. Don't be afraid of them. One of the things I plan to share in my session is that at first I was skeptical about Agile, and I was afraid that I couldn't get my writers to make the adjustment fast enough. So even though development was working in Agile, I tried to have our writing team work in a traditional format. And there's a really good Bible metaphor about putting new wine into old wineskins. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So embrace the new things and understand that in many ways they're good for our profession. They're compatible with the kinds of things that we've been saying for years. Technical communicators are strong at. And really try to be as collaborative with the product developers as you can. Again, Agile really emphasizes the small team aspect, of which the technical writer is a key part. And I think we should be very not only open to that, but we should really support it wholeheartedly.
All right, Larry. Well, thanks for talking to me. Again, this is Larry Kunz at the STC Summit.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure.